Hello, hello. No, talking, that's a problem. Talking, maybe I'll just go, let's just, okay. What's going on with my Zoom? Oh boy. Hello.
Hi, it's Carol. How are you?
I'm good. We both look a little different today. I somehow can't find, like, I'm not seeing, I see your picture, but I don't see anything else. Do you see anything else?
I see my picture, and then I've got your name, Laura, and Denise.
I'm not even seeing the rest of that. I don't know where that went on my computer. I'm going to close this down and see what happened.
Kind of lost the gallery view.
Yeah, I don't know how to get it back. Jeez. Jeez. All I see is you. Let's see.
Oh, click on speaker view up at the, well, mine's in the upper right.
I'm going to exit minimize video. Okay, that did it. Okay.
All
I
right.
just minimized the video and I didn't know how I did that.
Andrew's on his way. He just sent me a text.
Okay, sounds good. Is my video connected? I don't.
Not yet.
Okay,
Not yet.
start video. Okay, there we go.
There. Hello.
So I didn't look at all different because you just saw a black box. Where do you live, Carol?
I live in Toledo, Ohio.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Are you in Chicago?
Yes.
Yeah. We're not too far away.
Nope. One of my first good working buddies when I started working out of college moved to Toledo, and I've lost track of her and I've been wanting to reconnect.
Yeah. We moved back. This is our hometown, but we lived in DC for a couple different times, but came back, oh, probably about 7 years ago. I have the lovely benefit that all of my siblings live here and my mom, so it's very nice.
Nice. Yeah, my family's here too, so.
Makes a big difference. Although I'm not expecting any of our kids to be here.
Yeah, you know, I had one was in California and one was in New York, and my California girl came back, so I'm so happy to have her back. She likes Chicago and she lives on the north side, and we'll see about New York daughter. She might be out there for life.
We've got two temporarily here, one from Chicago and one from Columbus College.
Hi,
hello, Andrew.
Hey, so I thought maybe I could just take a quick second here to make sure I could share my screen and do all that fun stuff.
Okay. Looks like Laura's been trying to connect to the audio. Now I see a check.
Hey,
wow.
Video, wow.
Who is that stranger? It's good to see you.
So is that showing up all right?
Yep. Laura, you might have to enable your audio. It looked like you were talking and I didn't hear you.
Home has become our office, our classroom, and the center of...
Now can you hear me?
Now I could hear you. Yep.
Okay. Because I'm on my phone.
Okay.
Because audio on my computer doesn't work. I'll get it all going one of these days. Thanks for letting me know.
Good afternoon, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Hello, Andrew.
So just a quick second of introductions here. This is our full panel. So excited that everybody got in. So Janice Wakely and Laura Basili are from ComEd, Illinois' premier electric utility. And Elizabeth Walton is from Freddie Mac, home mortgage space. So I'm excited to have you all join us today. Thanks for coming on a little early and just giving us a chance to do our quick login here. Okay, so I need to log out because, hold on a second. Okay, so not log out, but sometimes my mouse gets a little kooky. Let me see. Steps. Carol, is there? Carol, you're able to see your slide here?
No, I'm still seeing the ComEd slide.
Bring your shared window to the front. That's not what I wanted. Now are you seeing it?
No.
Okay. How about that one?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a particular slide just to confirm what you were sent me earlier that I should just look to just to make sure?
Yep. Go toward the end, the perceptions of business, that one. Whoop, go back, whoop one. Yep, that's perfect. Thank you.
And then Elizabeth, are you seeing your slides?
Yep.
All right.
So Andrew, does the PDF version work, or would it be better if I sent you that in PowerPoint?
You know, it might be better in PowerPoint because that PDF, it's a single document, right? So I have to scroll.
All right, let me work on sending.
Is that a hassle to send it as PowerPoint?
Nope, working on it right now.
All right, great. Hey, good morning, Erin.
Hey, how are you? It's 1 o'clock, by the way, afternoon.
Sorry, I've been in a workshop session since 9 this morning, so my perception of day, I'm not even sure if it's even day.
I mean, I feel like that's just standard anymore, right? I don't know where we are.
Does not feel like a Friday.
No, well, so now that we do the omnibus every other week, like really the only measure of time I had was like, oh, the questionnaire is due, so it must be a Monday. And now I'm like, I have literally no idea what day it is.
Gotta get some water.
Okay.
I had to get rid of my corded phone and get that to another room.
Your corded phone, really?
Just we have one of those.
Loving the background there, Mike.
Yeah, I thought I'd do this on purpose.
Nice.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. Hi.
It looks hot there. Is it hot?
It is hot. I think it's going to be about 102, 105 today.
Oof. Are the pools open?
The pools are open. Yes.
Mike is out in Las Vegas visiting our Las Vegas client.
Yeah, we're here for the reopening. We've been doing a lot of work with Las Vegas, the city, and with the properties here for their reopening, and thought we'd come out and see firsthand a lot of the things that they've implemented. We've been helping with the safety protocols for the whole city and for some of the properties. And so far, I've got to say that 90% of the things have been going really well, and they've implemented a lot of the procedures that we've advised them and what visitors have asked for. But it was a little rowdy, I think, last night down on Fremont Street. Very hard to do crowd control, in that area, downtown Las Vegas. People were definitely having fun, but the word that we're hearing is expectations are pretty high and being met for occupancy. More people are coming than what they thought. That's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
How have you noticed what's been different in the hotel, Mike?
So in this hotel where we are, and most hotels that we've been advising, first thing is a thermal scan. You walk into the property and you are scanned for temperature. They're not doing it on your forehead. It's literally a thermal scan. So it's pretty non-invasive. Social distancing is being encouraged throughout the property. Hand sanitizer stations are everywhere throughout the hotel. The gaming floor is spaced for social distancing, and most people are abiding by it. I would say that here at the Wynn, about 40% of the people have a face mask on. 60% don't. But yes, thank you, Chris. Every single employee, though, has a face mask on. 100%, every employee. And people are just genuinely very, very pleased and happy to have visitors back. The pools are open. Everything has to be done by reservation, though. And what we've been told is part of that is to control for spacing, like at the fitness center, but it's really for contact tracing. In case someone does get sick, they want to know where you've been on the property. So I've been really impressed, by the way that these properties are implementing and by most of the patrons that are here following the rules.
Great. That's great to hear. Excited.
Yeah.
You said, Mike, that the airport was a little bit less so?
Well, I was not impressed by Dulles Airport. I have to say,
really?
I was extremely disappointed in Dulles. The Washington Post ran a story 2 weeks ago about what to expect at the airport, and it was very, very bad. No signage, no hand sanitizer stations, no protocol in the seating and gate area for distancing. United Communications was very poor at the gate for boarding, just really, really bad. McCarran, on the other hand, and Denver, so we transferred in Denver, really good in Denver. McCarran, who we advised here in Las Vegas for their procedures, really well done. McCarran Airport here in Las Vegas. Hand sanitizer stations, lots of messaging about social distancing and safety. Public transportation, well done, on airport transfer. So we did rent a car. Rental car facility, really well done. So I was very impressed. But not with Dulles, unfortunately. So if any of y'all are back home in Washington and flying out of Dulles, just be prepared.
Not anytime soon.
Yeah. Now on the plane, every seat, middle seat was blocked. But the flights were pretty crowded. But that's because it's just limited. They're limited flight options that are out there.
Could you get direct, or did you have to connect?
No, the nonstop doesn't run anymore, so we have to connect. We connected through Denver and on the way back to Washington, we'll be connecting through Houston on the way back. So, but Dulles has got some work to do on the airport experience.
Yeah, I remember reading, that's disappointing here because I remember reading that same article you were talking about, Mike, and it really sounded like they were trying to take a leading role in kind of among the airports across the country.
I mean, it's such a huge international entry point. I mean,
Right.
it's pretty much up there with JFK, LA, and Atlanta. So, I mean, the amount of traffic that was going through there globally was massive, and I know a lot of that has died off, but still, you kind of hope that they had their ducks in a row before that picked back up.
Yeah. Limited, very limited concessions at the airport, as you would expect. You know, many things are closed in terms of concessions, but some are open, like Hudson News. You know, if you need to grab water or snack, that's open. If you need to grab, you know, a sandwich, like Potbelly in Terminal C and Dulles was open. So they did have some concessions that were open, but TSA pre-check and going through things were quite limited. But you know, we'll see how Houston did. But Las Vegas is doing a really nice job. You know, and McCarran as an airport has just they've done a really nice job too. You know, so be interesting to see how the other airports are, you know, across the experience. But Las Vegas so far is doing a nice job.
Welcome everyone. Friday morning, afternoon, all sorts. Nice to see the smiling faces of everyone. Lots gone on since we last talked. We're going to go ahead and jump in and get started. We've got more that are coming in but we're at the top of the hour. We've got a lot of great content that we want to walk through with you today. We also are at a point of pivoting to try to leverage this forum in a slightly different way over the coming months. As mentioned in our emails that we sent to you, as well as the last session that we had, we felt pretty strongly that the value proposition and the engagement that we've been able to have with each of you as a group and with many of you individually, that we want to keep doing this. But we also felt like the cadence needs to shift a bit, and for a couple of reasons. One is a lot of things are beginning to change to where we need to be focusing, and maybe every other week makes a lot of sense. The other thing is that we know that the value when we were in the midst of this over the last, what I can't believe is 12 plus weeks, a lot of the value was immediately seeing stuff and like, okay, what's there? What's going on? How is it shifting? What are the attitudes or the beliefs? We still are going to do that, but we want to shift a lot more to implications and dialogue around implications in addition to showing you stuff. We've been giving that as best we can along the way. But we feel like by doing it every other week, we can be in a better position to be able to spend some time more than just Thursday night to Friday morning and add some things to that dialogue and implications and engage with many of you. We'll also have a little more dialogue on specific topics. We may, now don't get scared, but we may or may not do breakout groups again. That was fun. I know it scared some of you, but not everybody. It was kind of fun to do that. We'll probably do that once or twice. But we are going to continue at least through the election cycle. As is evident in the last 7 days, I don't even know how to say this without bringing all the emotions and stuff around it. There's a lot going on. And the social unrest on top of the COVID-19 pandemic and the things to try to figure out what we're doing and how we're doing it, things are changing. We know each of you are dealing with these business realities. So thank you for joining us today. We are going to start to layer in things that go beyond just the pandemic, because clearly what's happened in the last 7 days that is tied into that will continue to be a big part moving forward. You can't intertwine those, and it's revealing other issues that are going to be critical, that are facing how you respond to the pandemic, and then how you play a role in these other social unrest realities that are pretty real and big. So we'll do our best to add new questions here and there. Today, we are going to do a couple of things. We're going to show you some data that we already had, but we've now looked at it through some different lenses. And Aaron's going to walk through and look at some of the ethnicity differences. And there's some obvious reasons why we felt like that would be a productive discussion as well, in a sensitive and hopefully inspirational way to guide better thinking and decision-making. We also have some of our partners that I'll have Andrew and Carol introduce that are going to join us, some of our clients that we work with that are going to talk about a very real side of this, and we'll show some new data that we haven't shared that our team will walk through about the way people are dealing with the non-discretionary things, the things that you got at your rent, your mortgage, your utilities, your day-to-day, and look at from that lens. We felt like that's a good filtered lens that we haven't really delved into as a group here. I want to hear their experiences and what they're learning and doing and what that might help us all understand. And then we'll have some dialogue around that. We're also going to, before we close, ask you all to use the poll feature of the Zoom tool, and we're going to give you some topics that we've heard from you are important for the coming months, and we want to get your take on some of those, so we'll have you quickly just weigh in on a very quick vote. So without any more setup, thank you again for being here with us. And Aaron, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll head straight into whatever question and answer there. We'll go straight into Carol and Andrew.
All right. Thanks, Maury. Let me see if I can do this. So as Maury said, our tracking is now moving to an every other week format. So this week we actually didn't field any additional questions, but we went back into the data to kind of look and see sort of what else we might have missed in the speed of turning things around for last week's roundtable. And one of the things that we've been talking about internally and with a number of you, and we know is just kind of, out there, is the social unrest and the protests and kind of everything around this issue of racial justice, which has really come to light more so than normal in the last couple of weeks. So we did some digging into some of the data we have and looked at kind of differences between whites and African Americans. And we only did those two groups just for sample size reasons. In some places, I think we've got some findings among Hispanics in where we could do it, but those are really the two groups we're going to be focusing on. Before we get into that, though, there's just one piece of data we didn't get to last week that I want to point out, and I think it will tie in well with what Andrew, Carol, and the rest of the team will be sharing after me. So since the very beginning, we've been asking a question about various aspects of people's lives and whether they think the outbreak had a positive or negative or no effect on them. And so just two I wanted to highlight were my job and my finances. And what you see in the pattern for both is that these have kind of leveled off a bit in terms of the negative impact. And so the impact that people felt at the beginning has tapered off a little bit. Keep in mind that the scale here on this graph is only going from 40 to 60. So we're still at almost half of people who said there's been a negative impact. So there's a little bit of tempering there, but still a lot of people feeling like the impact to their finances and their job is really strong. And Andrew and Carol and the rest of the team will get into kind of details there and what that means a little bit later, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage with that one piece of data. Then a sort of a spotlight on the African-American experience within COVID. There's some things where we see no differences, and there's some things where we see really big differences. And the reason we want to highlight that is to kind of add to the dialogue that's happening right now that talks about the differences in life experiences generally based on your race in America. And a lot of the data points we've been talking about so far is looking at America as a whole. And I think that's important to get a sense of where the country is. But I also think that we and companies and brands need to recognize that different communities are reacting in really different ways. And that matters when you're talking to people and trying to communicate with them effectively. So the first question, I'll go through a couple of our key metrics. The first one is the question we ask every week about whether the crisis is bringing us closer together or driving us further apart. Here, I'm only looking at closer together, just because it was too much data on the slide otherwise. The dark line is the total, the purple line is whites, and the yellow line are blacks. And what you can see is that we hit the peak of people believing we were closer together in that mid-April period. And at that point, everyone was pretty much on the same page. But it took African Americans longer to get there. And then as you look at the data moving forward from that point, everybody else was in this kind of slow decline, but there's a little bit more bouncing around among the African American community. And so we thought about reasons kind of why that might be, and we don't have anything that points us to a concrete conclusion there. But something that we did find is that African Americans compared to whites have had a more emotionally positive reaction throughout the crisis, even though early on they didn't feel as though it brought people closer together at the same levels as others. So they're almost twice as likely than whites to say they feel supported during the crisis. And then for those of you who have been with us before, we looked at the values question where we took a number of values and asked people if it made them feel more positive or more negative, or if they felt more negative about that or positive since the crisis, and then we have a net score. And so while some of these items are still, net negative in the Black community, they're significantly higher than the white community. So sense of freedom at a score of -29 is 19 points more positive than within the white community. The one here I find most interesting is sense of self-esteem is actually positive. Since the crisis began in the African American community, there is a net gain in self-esteem, which is 17 points higher than the white community. And then there's some other ones here, sense of social order, sense of security. And this is all from the May 28th fielding. So it was after the George Floyd incident on May 25th, but before sort of the demonstrations and the news coverage of it skyrocketed. And so we'll take a close look at this data next week when we field again. But I just thought that this was really interesting, that there's a real difference in perception or reaction to the crisis at an emotional level. So then we looked at some of our other standard metrics in terms of reopening. Whites are significantly more likely to agree that it's time to start reopening. 61% in our most recent data compared to 35% of Blacks. However, it is important to note that there was a really big partisan difference here. So there's a 26-point gap on race. There's a 30-point gap on political party. And Democrats, or excuse me, African Americans are twice as likely to identify as Democrats. So we feel like here, this is actually pretty close to just showing a partisan difference. Whether we can attribute that to a partisan difference or not, it's still important to recognize that that difference between those communities is there in terms of perception. And then similarly on the question about agreeing about the balance of public health and economy, we again see a gap, knowing that this is driven by party, but the gap between Blacks and whites here is only 10 points, whereas the partisan gap is 27 points. So this seems like it's driven by, a little bit less by party, because we've got a little bit of a closer gap there. So those are just some of the key metrics we wanted to break out and show everybody how those differ. So when we get to, maybe why there's a closer gap between Blacks and whites on this idea of balancing the economy and health, when we look at the data that we have about jobs, and I didn't get a chance to look at this within the jobs report that came out today, but Blacks were significantly more likely to have had negative impacts on their job, whether it was job loss, furlough, reduction in hours, or salary. 45% experienced some form of salary reduction compared to just 37% of the total and 31% of whites. So you can understand, even though there might be a partisan pull or other cultural aspects that say this, the Black community might be in favor of staying locked down and not reopening, there's an economic reality here that really can't be ignored. And similar to that, in that vein of economic crisis, there is a strong difference in perception on how people of different races and ethnicities view the business response to the crisis. So last week we had roughly 40% say that businesses were doing a good or an excellent job responding. But as you'll see, that number is significantly higher among whites and significantly lower among Blacks and Hispanics. And again, those are groups that have been more likely to see job and income loss during the crisis. The other thing we saw was that African Americans were more likely to delay their education due to the crisis. If you look at the difference, there's less of a difference between adult, child, or family members' education, although African Americans are most likely to delay that in that situation. The difference between Blacks and whites on their own education is 16 points, where over half of African Americans say that they are delaying their own education because of the coronavirus, compared to just 39% of whites. And so if we think about some of the commentary that's come about in the last week about, you know, starting on equal playing fields and kind of the differences in how people get to where they are in life, I think this is a really important point to say. We know that there are discrepancies in the system, and the coronavirus seems to be maybe exacerbating those, or that it will in the future if this many people in the African American community are unable to continue their education. This goes to a question that Andrew and Carol and the team are going to talk about a little bit later. That's new data, but we had a question last week that we didn't share that we'll share today, talking about recurring monthly expenses and how those are prioritized. There are some differences here. So these are kind of the big ones: automotive loans, medication, and educational loans. And I want to point out that these numbers are only among the people to whom they apply. So if you said this expense doesn't apply to me, you're not included in this data. And so it just, I don't really know if we've got specific conclusions to make from this data, but I thought it was interesting that priorities are different among things that you might not think would be different, or that really point to kind of cultural differences. And I think it's important that we understand what those are and understand why, try to understand why those exist, and then communicate appropriately. And I think the medication one is something that stuck out to me. And I know that there have been different public health initiatives in various communities over the last couple of decades based on cultural perceptions of certain diseases or certain actions that might improve or have negative effects on somebody's health.
Erin, one question came in, and I'd encourage everyone, please use the chat function, and we'll do this dialogue as we're going if there's clarifications or if you have an idea of an implication. And I don't know, Erin, if you'll have a direct answer, I'll pose this to you, but to the whole group. And that is, you know, African-American job situations likely to get impacted by COVID, but they're less likely to agree for the reopening. Any elaboration of that as to why or what that means, that either you or anyone on the call who wants to weigh in on why those two things coexisting, if their job situations like to be impacted, but yet they're less likely to agree for the reopening. Do we have any thoughts? Does anyone have any thoughts? You're in, and anyone else on our call?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and then I'll let others talk if they have ideas. So while they are less likely to favor reopening, I think there's a difference here in these two questions that I've pulled back up. So reopening, removing restrictions and reopening versus balancing the economy and public health. So you're much closer to the total when you start talking about balancing the economy. I almost wonder if reopening has become politicized, or maybe there are other meanings attached to it that feel more political. I mean, so if you remember, before all of the rallies and protests to do with racial justice, you had a round of rallies and protests about reopening the economy, and they were dominated by a certain type of person and a certain ideology. And so part of me wonders if that terminology, and maybe we can look into kind of split sampling in the next round to test this, has anything to do with it. But the African-American community is definitely more in favor when you talk about balancing the economy compared to reopening. And we know they need to get, you know, like people who are out of work need to get back to work, kind of regardless of the racial split. And we see that in the data. And I would imagine that community is feeling it just like every community that suffered serious job losses.
I think also,
go ahead,
to
Carol.
keep in mind that the community may be also facing some higher health risk and impacts from COVID. We've certainly seen in major cities like Detroit, just a very high population of people of color being impacted more so than the broader population, might have a higher intensity of some underlying conditions at risk. And so that can become a more difficult decision for them in terms of protecting their health and weighing those economic benefits. It's definitely challenging.
Yeah.
We did see that African Americans were significantly less likely to have said that they've gone out without a mask. And so I think, Carol, that talks to that point, that there are additional health risks. And so kind of more precaution, or being more diligent about precautions, is out there.
Great, thank you. And I know fear is associated with that health impact you were talking about, Carol, as well, which we find does correlate with, well, don't open, whereas anxiety is more about the job front. But thank you.
Well, let's hope that the news that's coming out this morning about the better than expected job recovery situation that was released this morning benefits multiculturals, and particularly the African American population. So, that's to be seen based on some of the quickest recovering sectors that they were profiling. So let's hope that happens with this group, offsets that.
Thanks, everyone. So the last thing I wanted to point out about these kind of different bill priorities is that we looked at the priorities not just by racial divides, but also by income, knowing that there are some structural problems within the system that tie lower income levels to racial minorities. But the differences didn't exist by income, it was only by race. And so I think, again, this shows that different communities have different priorities, different situations, and we have to, if we expect to connect with individuals or individual communities, we have to understand those communities and their priorities, and their kind of culture and outlook on the world. And so, these three specific points don't really help us do that, but I thought they underscored the need to do that. Then we also took a look at the questions we had about income inequality. So the first one here, that people think that there's a gap between the most wealthy and the poor in this country, and it's big and it's only getting bigger. People agree with that across the board. When you start to talk about what we should do about that, that's where you start to see differences. So requiring federal government to directly address poverty is significantly higher among African Americans. And the idea that it's the responsibility of the federal government to protect and guarantee a basic standard of living is also significantly higher among African Americans. Although here, I would say that it's important, again, to remember that African Americans are significantly more likely to identify as Democrats, and those are two kind of key components of the modern Democratic platform. So even though African Americans are more likely to say, we want the government to address these things and provide, trust in government among the African American community, understandably, is significantly lower than the total. So fewer than 1 in 5 have trust in the federal government, and the state government, which kind of in our data overall has been the level of government people have the most confidence in, they're 10 points behind the total there. So it creates this weird dichotomy of a community that wants to see more federal involvement, wants to see more guarantees and benefits provided by the government, but doesn't really trust the government. And so I think structuring that, if that's the path that the country decides to take forward, will be kind of tricky, but just kind of a discrepancy I thought that was interesting to point out. And that is what we have on kind of the racial splits in the data. We're going to continue to look at that. And I think I mentioned that as we field next Wednesday, we've got a number of questions going into our survey, less about whether people support or oppose the protests and the demonstrations, or what they think about what's happened in the past, but we really want to try to focus on what people believe are solutions going forward, because we believe that's where we need to focus. That if we can't kind of put forward concrete solutions, or understand how people want to move forward from this, that the momentum and the moment will be lost. And I don't think anybody wants to see that happen. So that we'll be sharing at our next roundtable, which appropriately is on June 19th. So stay tuned for that. And now, Maury, I don't know if we want to open it up to some additional questions, or if we want to kick it over to Andrew and the rest of the team.
Yeah, if anyone, as Andrew's getting set up, and Carol, if anyone, and I think you just need to hit stop sharing, and then Andrew will go back on. But if anyone else has any questions on that, there's a question about, do they try, and Dean, we do have the demos that we'll share on that, in terms of their education level. But do we think that it's that they don't trust government, or they don't trust the current administration? And that obviously has itself, a big question that's going to have different opinions, probably even among people in this group. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's government. And the reason I would say that is because if it was the current administration, I would expect to see the states leveled out, right? So the populations, especially among African Americans, shift towards blue states, New York, California, Illinois with Chicago. And so I would expect to see the state number maybe a little bit higher if it was a split of blue versus red. But the fact that the trust in state government is even lower compared to the total than federal government makes me think that it's something to do with government generally. And I mean, again, so remember, we fielded before sort of the big explosion in coverage on this, but the George Floyd incident had happened, and we were starting to get it. And so I think that very easily could have fed into this, the sentiment of our community can't trust the government. I feel like that's relatively reasonable. And that you could still at the same time believe that you want the government to do more to provide. I don't think they're necessarily attitudes that don't make sense together. It just becomes a tricky balance.
And we do know that trust question that we're reporting is filtered through the, things you hear about this pandemic. That's clearly how we had originally done that. But nevertheless, you've got a group of people across the country, not just African Americans, but we can see even more there, that the trust in terms of response and knowing what people are going to say and who they can turn to. And we're actually just diving into a little more detailed qualitative work to try to get a little more into that, to understand trust. Because as businesses, as we think about running our own company, working with our employees, working with you, and then trying to unpack the reality of society, is that figuring out trust in such an uncertain time is tricky. And when people get afraid and get anxious, then anger comes up quick, especially when there's uncertainty and inability. And so we're going to have to navigate that as businesses and organizations in this country to try to figure out how to do that. And one of the big pieces is going to be about that we want to shift to now is, people have just basics in life they've got to cover, and how they do that and how that impacts the way they make the other discretionary decisions on money, but then time. It's not just discretion on money, but time and attention in their life, and balancing the work-life balance with their family. And so we want to shift to that. So Andrew, Carol.
Thanks, appreciate it. Yeah, and I think as we kind of look at the backdrop of what's been happening in the economy, we certainly see that a lot of those leading indicators have really had some historical declines, but hopefully today is a bit of a silver lining, right? So we've seen a couple of hints of maybe we're bottoming out. There's a lot of unknowns, certainly, about will there be a second wave? How quickly can the economy begin to recover? But if we look at consumer confidence at a 6-year low, but a little bit of a modest tick up in May, and with the jobs report coming out today with unemployment a little bit lower than expected, still still much higher than the 2008 depression, but again, some level of maybe we're beginning to bottom out, and we're going to really want to pay attention to these signals. But you know, as Mari indicated, a lot of people are struggling, right? We see that nearly half of the public is concerned about their ability to pay their basic household bills. Millions have you know, filed for unemployment, over 43 million as of this week. Many million have asked for help, for whether they're talking about credit card payments, partial payments, forgiveness, but also
Oh, did we lose Carol?
Yep.
Mm.
Probably think
Andrew?
the microphone cut out there.
I think she's frozen, Andrew.
Okay. Well, I'll try to pick up where Carol left off. So, and Carol, if you just give me a high sign if you could come back on there. But we talked about the significant number of Americans who've reached out for mortgage forbearance, seeking assistance through having loans either postponed or payments. And so really just this concept of that there is this palpable level of concern out there about paying household bills. And you can see a bit of that that comes across when we talk about some of the factors that are driving that. And certainly unemployment being one of those important factors, right? So we have about over a third of Americans who are telling us they've either had significant impact by either having their hours reduced, laid off, or furloughed. And we see that difference plays an important gap when we look between Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X. So Gen Z and millennials, we've got about over half of those audiences saying that they've had some kind of direct financial impact in the labor space, only compared to about 4 in 10 for Gen X, and then significantly lower for boomers and silent. Carol, did I hear you back?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, just another comment on the generational gap. There's the, you know, think about the millennials, right? So they were the generation that was greatly impacted by the prior recession in 2008. So they're a little bit more vulnerable and maybe a bit of a double hit between the economic impact here. And then with Gen Z, at least the older part of Gen Z just coming out of college and the challenge in finding internships and work. So really important for companies to be looking through the lens of their target audiences by generation, because the impact is definitely different. Okay, so we took a look at, you know, the priority of monthly expenses in terms of paying those expenses by generation. And if you look from left to right, it does a nice sense of following Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So we've got our top focus on our expenses related to food, housing, our power, our warmth, or cooling at this time, followed by some of the medical expenses with health insurance and medication. But you can also see some of the gaps, right, between the differences by generation. A little bit stronger with Gen X and the boomer population as it relates to the priority on housing and mortgage. Older generations, as you might expect, a little bit higher in terms of those health costs, health insurance and medications. And then the younger population as well in terms of student loans. And as Aaron mentioned earlier, very little difference in terms of differences by people of color here. Okay. Drilling down a little bit more deeply in terms of the level of concern that the public is feeling to pay their electric bill. If you look at that top line there, the total, it's about split in terms of half the public is not at all concerned and the other half has some level of concern. Much higher, again, from a generational standpoint among the millennials and Gen Z, those that are having a deeper economic impact on their paycheck. And then as we looked at people of color, also we saw 7 in 10 among Black and Hispanic consumers that have a higher concern about their ability to pay versus 4 in 10 among white consumers. So as we think about those implications, again, the importance of understanding your target audiences through the lens of the different segments and looking at their needs in terms of their personal situations. We also took a look at the level of performance as it relates to providing reliable power during COVID. Many people working from home. On top of that, now we have business reopening, so that demand is high for reliable and affordable, reliable power. And here again, we see about, half of the population have a strong perception, excellent or very good, yet it differs by generation. The younger you are, the less confidence and support for reliable power from looking at your own provider, as opposed to the boomers and the silent. So it gives the utility companies an opportunity to more deeply engage with those younger audiences and begin to communicate what they're doing to help support the ability to provide affordable and reliable power. We also looked at that same question through the lens of, looking at the national grid and the different regional perceptions. Then we saw a little bit lower confidence in reliable power on the West Coast and also in the Deep South in terms of the West South Central, Texas in particular. So you can even see with the neighbors there between the East South Central and the West South Central, about a 20% gap point there in terms of those perceptions of reliability. Moving on, Aaron talked a little bit about this in terms of the performance of business, and we're seeing a bit of a dip. So it had been trending a higher proportion of the public indicating that business had been doing an excellent or very good job. Now we're seeing that dip down a little bit, a greater sense in terms of doing just a fair job. And we did see, as Aaron mentioned, some deep differences there by people of color. And we also see it by generation. Gen Z, Gen X, and Millennial, far less likely to give excellent and good scores to corporate America versus the boomer and the silent generation. So again, it really points out there's a lot of differences as we look at the different generations and how they're perceiving. And there's an expectation, I think, it's certainly even more clear this week, but beyond what you are saying, people are really looking for the action. What is it specifically that you're doing to help support people during this time? We asked an open-end question to get a little bit deeper in terms of what companies are doing. We had a lot of commentary specifically about the auto insurance companies and some of the rebates and credits that they've been giving to their customers. Utility companies in terms of forgiveness on penalties. They're not turning off power. They're working with their customers to help support them during these times. What the retail environment is doing in order to provide safe shopping. And so we can look through these narrative and verbatims and see many examples of what companies are doing today and really putting actions behind their words. As we look at this and kind of look to see what are some of those core implications, I think for me, as I looked at the data across these questions, it was striking in terms of the generational differences and really the opportunity for you to think through that in terms of your customers, your stakeholders, your members, your alumni, to really understand what they're facing today and how that relates to how you communicate with them in terms of understanding their priorities. With that, Andrew, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Let me move on here to my next slide. Slides. Great. Thanks, everyone. Carol, thanks again for that great background. I think that sets us up really well for giving us some great context for the panelists that we have today. I don't think it's an overstatement for me to say that today's panelists represent businesses that really serve as foundations that make our way of life possible here in the United States. And I'm speaking specifically about electric utilities and home work. Joining us today on the electric utilities side are Janice Wakely, the Senior Consumer Insight Analyst, and Laura Basili, Manager Marketing and Consumer Insights from ComEd in Illinois. And on the home mortgages side, we have Elizabeth Walton, the Director of Corporate Strategic Insights from Freddie Mac, located here in Reston, Virginia. So I'm going to start with, so first of all, thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to start with Janice and Laura. So, you know, ComEd has been supplying safe, reliable, dependable, innovative electric service in Illinois for over 100 years. You have over 4 million customers. You serve 70% of the population of the state. Carol gave us some good insights into both consumer priorities and to some degree anxieties when it comes to dealing with their electric bills. I wonder if you could share with us a bit about what ComEd is doing to understand those pain points for consumers and how you're communicating with your customers during ComEd or during COVID.
Sure.
Okay. I'm Janice and Laura. We're happy to talk a little bit about what we're doing. So in terms of understanding customers during COVID times, that's been 90% of my job the last couple of months. And we've done a number of things at our company. And we really started on day one with listening to our internal channels. So what are we hearing in our call center? What are customers saying? What's their emotion? What's their concerns? How do we best arm our CSRs to be empathetic and comfort them? And what are we hearing in our social channels? And when people come to our website and they're in chat or sending us emails. And we also had a couple of tracking studies that some have been going on through or some have paused, but we've been really on a daily basis informing the company what we're hearing internally from those sources. We've also launched a couple of COVID specific surveys to really get a pulse on, you know, emotions, worries, concerns, some of the things that, you know, Heart+Mind has been tracking. And we've also asked our customers directly, you know, during these times, what's the information that you would find most valuable coming from ComEd to help you? And we've done a lot of listening to lots of different webinars, some related to our industry, but outside the industry. And certainly, I mean, we learned a lot of good things from this customer roundtable over the last 3 months. So what we found, I mean, the key information needs that are most relevant to our customers and to our brand really center around what Carol was talking about earlier in the presentation about the need for financial assistance and support. Some of our recent surveys, we're seeing some similar numbers that over half of our customers are worried about being able to pay their bills if this goes on much longer. About 2/3 are stressed or concerned about money and finances. So that's a really big concern. And we're seeing that, you know, that's the key thing that we're seeing in our call center. And as we've also talked on this call, since we're, you know, everybody's doing everything in their home now, you know, we need to ensure customers that we're going to continue to provide reliable service that they can count on. And because they're doing everything under the sun in their home now, and now in Chicago, the summer heat is just starting. So our air conditioners and fans are cranking. As you can see my fan maybe in the background. Their bills are starting to go up and they're going to go up more. So what can we do to help them, you know, manage their bills to the best that they can? I probably should have added a couple other things on here that I think are also, we know are important to our customers. They want to know what we're doing to support the community. We've talked about that in this panel in earlier sessions, and also how to avoid scams and fraud. So those are the key areas that I think our communications are starting to focus on, and Laura's going to talk about that shortly. But the other thing that really caught my attention over the last couple of weeks were the slides on the decline in the human values. And we've done some brand work with Heart+Mind, so we know what the key values are that ladder up to our key services and benefits. And security, peace of mind, and well-being are really important to our brand and our customers. So now more than ever, it's really important for us to evoke those emotions and values in our communications. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thanks, Jana. So that's a perfect lead in. So we developed an integrated communications approach for this pandemic. We really felt that we needed to lift our customers up and let them know that we were here to support them, to give them some some peace of mind. So we developed new messaging pillars around ways to save some energy. The whole idea was supportiveness. So we're here to help. So under our supportiveness, we had a couple different channels. One way was through saving energy at home. We developed some advertising campaigns. We wanted to reach the majority of our customers to let them know that we were here to help. So I'm going to share with you the campaigns that we developed. And then if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those. So these are in market now. So under our supportiveness pillar for energy at home, we know a lot of people are at home now, they're using their energy, and how could we help them? So this campaign tries to address some of that, to let them know that we have ways. We developed a new web page. We have tips for staying at home. We know that the bills are coming in and they're higher, so we want to be there to help them with that. So this campaign addresses that. We have different channels. We have radio, digital, and social. The 4 squares here on the left, that's the digital campaign that's running. And we have radio, which we can play for you. Andrew, if you want to go ahead and play that.
For many of us, home has become our office, our classroom, and the center of our social lives. So as we're spending more time at home, ComEd has simple ideas to help you save energy and money. Unplug devices when you're not using them, and only run your dishwasher when it's full. While ComEd is keeping the lights on, check out more tips on ways to save from the ComEd Energy Efficiency Program. Visit ComEd.com/home savings.
Thanks, Andrew. So we wanted to do radio because we wanted to be able to offer this in different languages. And we've been doing that with these campaigns. So it's not only in English, but it's in Spanish and Polish radio, and then we have that in the print as well. The second campaign that's also out now is around financial assistance. So we've done a lot to help our customers pay their bills, and we want them to know that. So in addition to other channels, such as sending out emails, putting bill inserts in their bills, we wanted customers to know that we were here to help. We have suspended disconnects. We have lots of different options for financial assistance. So we want them to know that they can call us and we'll help them come up with a payment arrangement. So this campaign just launched recently. Again, the different channels are radio, digital, community print, and as I mentioned, different languages. We have a wide variety here in the Chicagoland area of languages and cultural differences. So we just really wanted to make sure that we touched all those groups. So then this campaign is running now, and I'll let you go ahead and you could start with the radio if you'd like.
We're all looking for a little assistance adjusting to our new lives at home. ComEd can help. Through the Care Financial Assistance Program and flexible payment options, we'll try to find a financial assistance solution that works for you. We're also suspending disconnections and waiving any new late charges through at least June 1st. If your service has already been disconnected, please call us at 800-334-7661. ComEd, let's power through this together.
And then the last campaign, this just launched, and this is around a combination of appreciation and as well as reliability. We want our customers to know that we're in this together. So it shows a little bit of ComEd, but we also want to show appreciation to the first responders. And as a utility, we're a first responder as well. So it's a little thank you to our employees, and you'll see that in here. If you want to go ahead and run this TV ad.
To the heroes among us, thank you for your tireless efforts. ComEd is working hard to keep the lights on and provide assistance to those facing financial hardship. Now, more than ever, we're here to help power everything we need to get through this together. To learn more about customer assistance options, visit ComEd.com/support.
And then lastly, we've had a large consumer protection effort going on. And this started last year, and we did it all throughout 2019, and it's continuing to run in 2020. And this campaign just happened to already be planned to be in market, and the timing couldn't be better because there's so much energy fraud that goes on in our area, and we've been fighting it. And we don't want these scammers to take advantage of our customers now when this moratorium ends. We don't want them calling them saying, you know, we'll get you reconnected if you buy this green dot card, or if you go to this Bitcoin location to pay. So this is our consumer protection campaign that has been running different channels. We have community print, social media. We've been doing bill inserts, and then radio is running as well. And we're going to actually start this up again in July when our moratorium ends. Just to remind folks that we're not going to call you and ask, and demand payment. It's not what we do. We're not going to call you to sell you electricity. So we're really trying to educate our customers on that as well. So this all fits into the realm of supportiveness and providing our customers some peace of mind. And on this
message is brought to you by ComEd and the Better Business Bureau. There's a knock on your door, or your caller ID reads ComEd. How do you know they're actually with ComEd and you're not the target of an energy scam? Scammers are clever. They may threaten to turn off your service and ask you to make a direct payment with a prepaid cash card. Sometimes these impersonators ask you to call them back at a different phone number with your personal information. At ComEd, we care about your safety. We want to help you be better informed and avoid being scammed. ComEd will never come to your home or business or call you to sell you electricity, ask for your account number or other personal information, ask to see your bill, or ask for immediate payment with a prepaid cash card. ComEd cares. If you think you've been the victim of a scam or suspicious behavior, please call us at 1-800-EDISON-1 or visit ComEd.com/scam alert. ComEd, powering lives.
Okay. So the campaigns that are in market, and I think that's the end of the slides that I have.
Great. Thanks for that overview. That gave us a lot of great context. And I think kind of understanding the needs and understanding the market and how you communicate with those folks does a great lead into where we're going to wrap up with our second panelist today, which is on the Freddie Mac side. So I'm going to introduce Elizabeth Walton. Bear with me one second here as I get this up. There we go. Sorry about that. There, hopefully those can see that.
Yep.
Great. Elizabeth, take it away.
Sure. So Andrew gave me the fun of being at the end and during the last 8 minutes. So I'll try to run through this kind of quickly, and I will challenge Andrew to skip around for me so we can kind of all remain on time. So we move to the next page. I have to do the legal obligatory who is Freddie Mac slide, and only because there's not a lot of awareness of who Freddie Mac is and what we do. So in short, let me dispel kind of two myths out there. One, Freddie Mac is not a government agency. We are not a part of the government. We do operate as a fully functional business corporation, but with a very strong nonprofit-ish type of mission. And really that mission is that first statement, that we were created back in 1970 to provide liquidity, stability, and affordability to the housing market. The other myth is that we are a mortgage lender and that we provide loans to the general public. We do not. We actually work directly with mortgage lenders and purchase the loans that they provide out to the general public. And the benefit of that is that it frees up them to provide more cash and more loans. It also keeps interest rates low. And it also enables us to be there for the housing market, whether times are great, like they were months ago, and when times are not so great, as we kind of look into where we are with COVID and here over the next 6 months to a year. So if we want to move to the next slide. So where did we begin all of this? Really, and this, a lot of what I'm going to talk about dovetails really nicely with what Heart+Mind shared and Carol. What we were seeing at the beginning of March is a lot of our renter population, those who are most kind of impacted with COVID, were increasingly becoming cost burdened, spending more than a third of their income on their housing payments. Not that owners weren't. We have 30% who spent more than a third on their housing payments, but it seemed like renters were in a less financially stable kind of situation, even at the beginning of this. Moving on to the next page. And when we looked at where are their heightened concerns, so again, at the beginning of March, you see a lot of Americans worried of oh my God, are my finances going to change? Am I going to have a negative change in my financial situation? Is there going to be an impending economic recession? And then in particular, that area highlighted around losing their job. For renters, we had a 23 percentage point increase from August of last year to March of this year going, I'm concerned that I'm going to lose my job in the near future. All right. But what was interesting to me, and this has changed a little bit, despite all of that, we had a significant number of renters thinking they were going to not only move in the next year, but that move would be that they would buy a home. Where 18% planned that they were going to move and buy a home in the next year, 33% said they were going to move in the next 1 to 2 years. But then as we kind of moved into April, what we were starting to see again is that households really weren't prepared financially. You have a third of Americans just worrying day in and day out, do I have enough money to pay my bills? Another question that we ask them is, let's give a hypothetical scenario, whether you have or you haven't. Let's say you lost your job or lost part of your household income. How financially prepared are you over certain time frames? And we still see a third of Americans saying, I'm only somewhat prepared or very unprepared to just weather the storm for 6 months. And then another third that says I might be able to last 6 months, but I definitely don't think I'm be able to handle not having an income for a year. And then also, as we were all talking about unemployment and the job market, what we were seeing that is, again, this is April, even among those who were still employed at that point in time, you have about a third who say, I don't know if I'm going to have a job at the end of all of this. And then in particular, if they had already had an income reduction, had been laid off or furloughed, you have nearly 60% saying, I'm somewhat confident or not too confident I will have a job at the end of the day. So one of the big things that we get concerned about, particularly when there's a financial crisis, is, who do people reach out to? Do they know the right person to call if they're struggling? And are they aware of any programs out there for them? And so in April, what we found is 80% of Americans say, all right, if I can't pay my rent or my mortgage, I'll reach out to my mortgage lender or landlord immediately as soon as I know I can't make a payment. I would say that's a little high, and I think it's a little bit of a socially acceptable answer. I think that number would probably be realistically a little bit lower. But however, you also see on the flip side that, we only have 25% of Americans in April who knew that there's any programs or alternatives available for them if they can't pay their rent or mortgage. And when they're reaching out and trying to figure out, all right, what do I do if I can't pay? Internet first and foremost for everybody, but also for that renter population, again, that most cost burdened population, they're reaching out to their family members and friends. And I would beg to say it's not just for information, because again, we know that renter population tends to be a little bit younger, that they are also reaching out to their family to help provide financial assistance to them and helping them to pay their rent. And a little bit concerning, and that's why I would kind of take that 80% who said they would reach out to their mortgage lender down a little bit. You only have 32% of homeowners that say if they're concerned about paying their rent or mortgage, they would go to their mortgage lender first. So again, I would take that with a little bit of grain of salt. I think, consumers are going to do a little bit more of their own internal homework before they actually reach out to either their mortgage lender or to their landlord. Okay. And then thank you, Aaron. You set up this slide for me very nicely. So as we looked at a lot of the different challenges in terms of being financially prepared, job security, a lot of the same things that Aaron mentioned earlier coming out in terms of differences regarding race. We see here where we see African Americans and Hispanics feeling much less prepared. They're much more concerned that they won't have a job coming out of this. And so it really is kind of an audience for us to look at, because historically, when a economic recession happens, this audience is most impacted and most at risk for potentially losing a place to live and losing their apartments. And so how things stand today. So after I said all that, here is my glass half full, glass half empty slide. In the latest Heart+Mind poll that we did with them, so we looked at those who lost their income in some way, shape, or form, and we have 41% who believe that they will find a comparable job or income in 6 months or less. But then we have on the flip side another 40% who are saying, it's going to take me 7 to 12 months, if not even a year, to find a job that will bring up my household income to where it used to be. All right. So here, one of the things that we look at is, how confident are Americans in feeling that the housing market will remain strong throughout all of this. What's fascinating to me is that confidence, while varied week to week, has been relatively stable. But some of those key metrics that kind of go into the strength of the housing market, like, are Americans likely to buy a home? Are homeowners likely to refinance? We've seen some pretty significant declines, and particularly in the last week, around only 20% say that they're likely to buy a home, or 20% of homeowners are likely to refinance. And so that's something we're going to continue to monitor, because again, those are some of the core metrics at the end of the day that determine how strong is the housing market. And so as we've tracked around the concern about making housing payments, and that goes up there also with the utilities, we've seen it was relatively stable. I'm concerned. And then again, that same drop. And what I'm attributing this to is, I think as more and more states began to open, I think there's a level of optimism, whether it's realistic or not, a level of optimism that's coming about of like, okay, things are going to be okay. We're going to get back to some semblance of normal. So that concern that I won't be able to make my next payment is kind of diminishing. And we'll see how that kind of tracks and trends over time. And then again, we see that same concern falling with the Hispanic community, the Black community as well, but they're still increasingly concerned at the end of the day. And again, because they're so impacted with unemployment, can I make my housing payments? But on a positive side, they're also reaching out proactively to see if I can't make my payment, I'm going to reach out to my mortgage lender or to my landlord to see if I can get some semblance of a postponement. All right. And then the final slide, a lot of what Freddie Mac, was created for is in times like this. So we have been working behind the scenes with lenders to create alternatives to such things as appraisals, which are typically done in the home, and what are some ways, they can still kind of do their job. We are also offering, kind of forbearance, and it's really unprecedented, the level of forbearance that we're offering, both on for apartment lenders and for homeowners. For a homeowner, if you have a hardship from COVID, we are offering up to a year of forbearance on their mortgage without penalties or fees. For our multifamily lenders, we are also offering them to defer their payments, because if renters can't make their payments, the multifamily borrowers cannot as well. And so they can defer their loan payments for up to 90 days. Added on to that is, if you do take advantage of that deferment, you cannot evict anybody at that point in time in any of your properties. So again, what we're trying to do is make sure that even if an apartment building is having struggle, we offer that assistance to them, but also to those people who are living in those properties in particular, so that it can stay in their homes as well. So I went through that pretty quickly, Andrew.
No, you did. You did great. It sets such great context, Elizabeth, and you guys are obviously well prepared to try to help your clients and customers work through this challenge. I have one question before I let you go, and that is, this is not the only economic challenge that Freddie Mac has had to deal with. So how does what you're having to manage through now compare to the 2008, 2007, 2008 housing crisis that we all had to go through?
Well, I had the joy of joining Freddie Mac literally right before this happened, or the 2008 crisis happened. I would say, I think we learned a lot, number one, from that scenario. That was a scenario in which you could kind of steadily see the challenges in housing emerging. And where this one, it's kind of, it happened really fast and furious for a lot of folks. And what's really different, and I was actually heightened or positive to see in some of the consumer stuff that we've done is, you know, back then we saw people doing unprecedented behavior in the sense of like people leaving their keys in their mailbox and just walking away from their houses and not really knowing that there's a consequence to that. And so I'm heartened to see that. I think a lot of our data is showing consumers understand that there's a consequence to that, that something will happen to them, and it will impact them in the longer term scenario, and that it is better to reach out to the mortgage lender or to the landlord to say when they're struggling.
Great, thanks. So before I pass it back to Maury, I just want to thank all of our panelists. Really some great insight into the context of what's kind of happening in our environment as we look at all these numbers. So really appreciate your time joining us today and sharing your perspective and giving us a lot of great insight to think about it as organizations. So thank you very much. With that, I'll kick it back to you, Maury.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate everyone being here today. As you leave with us, if you wouldn't mind taking a look at the list of these topics, we've had a number of you share these topics with us and others we've talked about. We're shifting gears to be a little more on implications and dialogue around solutions. These are areas that we heard from you that might be important ones this summer and going into the fall. If you wouldn't mind just using that poll function and clicking any of those, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10, but hopefully you don't do all 10 because that wouldn't prioritize much, but just pick the ones that matter most to you that we could pull information out. And the last thing is that we are going to prepare on our next round. We're going to do a best of, and what I mean by that is we're going to take the highlights over the last 12 weeks, the things that we've heard, what we think they mean, and some of the things that you might have missed along the way. And that's really our theme of this next one that we come in and do in a couple of weeks from now. So tune in then, and now turn to Mike for parting comments, and we'll close out.
Well, I'll just say, as everyone is answering that agenda survey, this has certainly been a somber week in many ways, as Maury pointed out. And I think we all have felt that in our hearts and certainly have thought that in our minds. But in keeping that in mind, you know, we are also seeing that businesses, you all are beginning to make the shift now to recovery from the crisis. There are other reputational components, you know, that you all are now needing to address and deal with. But I would encourage you all to begin the shift to business planning right now. Of course, we saw that with ComEd, and Elizabeth spoke to that. And I'm here in Las Vegas. Our Las Vegas clients are on with us. Several of them are on with us. And that shift is happening now. And that shift is happening because the consumer is ready for that shift. Many of them are ready for that shift. And so that also has an implication of being able to understand expectations that your customers have, your visitors have, your employees have, your stakeholders have, and the needs that they now have. There's been very significant shift of needs that we as humans have because of the events that continue to transpire, and it becomes imperative to really understand expectations. And a big part of brand strength and reputational strength is understanding expectations and then being able to deliver on those expectations and certainly exceed them. Maury just wanted me to touch on kind of what's the vibe here in Las Vegas. And, you know, I would say that the vibe is getting back to the vibe of Las Vegas. This is a brand about energy and excitement and about adult freedom. This is a brand that is also very much about where things can only happen for certain experiences that one wants. And you see it coming back. And so that vibe is strong. But the other thing I'll leave you with is this. I was taken by the emotional response of the workers, the employees in this city. I think a lot of people, of course, who are coming here, and it really does represent America. There is no one demographic that is in this city right now as it is reopening. But I was really taken by the emotional response of the employees in this hotel property where I am, the people that are at the airport, the individual who was on the rental car shuttle driving us, just the positive emotional response that they had to wanting to get back, to wanting to have some control, to wanting to have some sense of freedom and some sense of security. And as you think about expectations and needs, contemplate that as well, you know, as how employees are feeling about this, thinking about it, and also your customers. So with that, I leave you all for the weekend, and thank you for the participation and just taking that pause, you know, every week to come together and to share some insights and implications and then bring that back to our organizations. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.